I'm sure it's on, but he'll turn it up.
Oh, it's on.
Yeah, it might be on.
Oh, it's on.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, I can't switch it on. Yes, before Taylor Hudak, who's a journalist, she is going to talk about the EU's equivalent of this new legislation that's passed. I want to introduce the panel. We have Andrija Klaric, who runs a Slobodny podcast on Rumble. He is also an activist and an entrepreneur. We've got James Patrick, who is an author and the director of the documentary Planet Lockdown. And we've got Marco Ricca, who's a cybersecurity expert, and he's been helping the resistance evade censorship. Taylor, over to you.
All right, thank you, Sonja, and thank you, Mike, for a fantastic presentation. In fact, it really helped inform some of the research that I have done on the European Media Freedom Act, or EMFA, and that's what I will be discussing just briefly here. And if you would like further details about this specific proposal, there is an extensive article on chdeurope.org. It's called Centralizing Information Control inside the EU's latest proposal to censor the media. You could check it out there. But first, I do want to begin by just speaking about the media in general, and that is that the status of the media, the future of the media impacts everybody here. It impacts all of you because it impacts your right to know, your right to have access to truthful information, because without access to the truth, we cannot solve the issues ahead of us. So I just want to make that point that this is a very important section today, and that we need support from the public as well, and to build communities, and we'll be discussing that throughout the day. But first, I also do want to touch on the fact that during the past 3 years, we have seen the language of public health used to destroy and control our public health under the guise of protecting our public health. And we are now also seeing the language of media freedom being used to control and to limit and destroy the media under the guise of protecting the media, hence the European Media Freedom Act, which has absolutely nothing to do with media freedom. And essentially what's happening here is that the European Commission has proposed a new law in September of 2022, seeking to centralize the EU media sector into a single market overseen by national regulatory authorities, as well as the Commission, through a new European Board for Media Services. A European Board for Media Services, and this will consist of representatives from, as I said, national regulatory authorities, as well as a representative from the Commission. So here you have the Commission essentially controlling the media sector, of course, through this European Board for Media Services. And similar to what Mike was discussing about the online safety bill in the UK, this proposal uses very vague language. In fact, it does speak a lot about attempts to, of course, further censor the press and censor so-called disinformation and foreign information manipulation, but it doesn't clearly spell out what that is. And again, this is all marketed to the public as an initiative that's going to help liberate the media. It's marketed as an initiative that's going to help aid in media pluralism and media independence. But an in-depth overview and look into this proposal, you will see that that's certainly not the case. I'm working off of notes here, so bear with me. Just to go over this briefly, it's important to understand the current framework that we have, because I think many of you may be wondering, well, how is this different than what we have in place today? So one of the current frameworks that this seeks to amend is the AVMSD, that is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. The EMFA proposal is in fact a regulation. This is unprecedented for our sector to have a proposal put forward to control the media, or to a piece of legislation put forward to monitor the media in the form of a regulation. So it's important to make that distinction. And also too, the EMFA proposal will not just apply to audiovisual media services, which is the current framework, it will also apply to the press sector, again, unprecedented for our sector. And I'm going to skip to a point here that really touches on and building upon what Mike has just presented here. And that is, of course, that this proposal seeks to control content from within the EU, but also content coming from outside the EU. We have already seen restrictions on RT and Sputnik. Expect more of that. This provides a further legal basis for the EU authorities to restrict content coming from outside the EU. And the idea here is that by default, because the media service provider is from outside the EU, it is considered by default to be a grave security risk to public security for people here domestically in the EU. Which is very ironic, because if the concern is about being controlled by third countries, you have to understand that this proposal puts the EU Commission in complete control of the domestic media sector. So it's very ironic. All right, and then here's practical applications to all of this. And this deals with VLOPs, or very large online platforms. That would be Amazon Store, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, those big platforms. In this proposal, a media service provider, which is anybody who would want to upload content or information, they would have to enter into a contractual agreement, which is, of course, drafted by this European Board for Media Services, which again, remember, has a representative from the Commission, heavily controlled by the Commission. And that media service provider would have to declare that it is, first, a media service provider as it is defined in the legislation. Secondly, declare that it is editorially independent from the member states and third countries, and also declare that it is subjected to the regulatory requirements and adheres to a self-regulatory mechanism. And also provide the contact details for the relevant national regulatory authority. That means that in case if a media service provider were to engage in so-called publishing of so-called disinformation, the national regulatory authority would be able to be easily contacted, and you would be reported. And I want to also give my panelists a moment here. So just a few more points to wrap this up. And again, please go to chdeurope.org for more information here on this particular proposal. But I just have, again, to say that for the media to flourish online and elsewhere, we would be far better off with less regulation, not more. So while some may celebrate this European Media Freedom Act, this is not the answer. The way forward is less regulation, building communities, and perhaps even considering going back to print media to circumvent legislation like this, which seeks to completely control the media. And remember, this is absolutely unprecedented for our sector. So those are just my contributions. If you would like to learn more, you can contact me, and we'll discuss it further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for that. Just going to the other panel.